All right, welcome back to Unhinged and Unranked. I'm Eighth. I am so caffeinated right now that my brain has NVIDIA Boost plus Reflex enabled. I'm joined by Slash Rank and Ross, and today we're going to be talking about game engines, pretending like we actually know how to develop a game.
Quadruple A titles.
So, I was doing research on, and I know like Unreal Engine is still really big, but it's also one of the older, probably suites of tools that you would consider a game engine. And there's a lot of history that connected into it that I wasn't aware of, even though I like all of the things that it connects to individually. But basically, Tim Sweeney was basically doing it as like a hobbyist project in his teens, working on games. He would just make games, most of which weren't published. He was just doing it for fun, and then eventually started working on them professionally. And quite a few big people came together for what was early Epic. You had Tim Sweeney, who was making the engine, but also helped was James Schmalz, who is the founder of Digital Extremes, who now makes Warframe and Soulframe. And when I was reading about that, I was like, okay, that makes sense why the Digital Extremes also worked on other stuff. Like they worked on Gears of War, I believe, which again, that was one of the big like Unreal Engine games. And then they used to do a lot of supporting development for other games. And it made sense of why Warframe has like a game engine where they've really like built their own thing where it can do all kinds of different stuff over the years. Because like this is one of the original guys who made a game engine in the first place. Of course, they're gonna know how to make their own game engine. They practically invented game engines.
Mm-hmm.
But like Epic or Unreal Engine was a pretty big deal, and they were licensing the engine to other devs before the original game Unreal came out. Like they made the engine to make the game, but they're also making it as a tool set for making and modifying games. It had its own, like level editors and a script editing system, like their own script language and all kinds of things like that. Like these are what we think of as the game engine now, but at that time, the tool sets were all probably made in-house and made to build a specific thing, but this was designed to build a lot of things.
When did they start distributing it to other people to use? Was it like from the start, or did they start off making their own games and then they eventually started sharing it?
They started before they actually even released Unreal. Like as soon as they were making that, they were also started licensing out to other companies before they had even finished their own game.
Okay.
And like there were games I didn't even know were Unreal 1, like the original Deus Ex game was on Unreal Engine 1, which is one of the like highest rated PC games of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know that game was on there. And I mean that whole genre of immersive sim, basically all the entries in that are pretty much on Unreal Engine, because you've got Deus Ex, and then downhill from that you've got stuff like BioShock and Dishonored, and I think even the later Deus Ex games are made on versions of Unreal Engine. So it's like that whole genre was basically just Unreal Engine stuff over time.
Mm-hmm. That probably helped to get like a big foothold early on, because what you're saying is that's one of the older ones, right? Out of the big like 2-3 that people use.
Oh yeah, Unreal Engine's absolutely the oldest. Like Unity is a lot newer than Unreal Engine is.
Yeah, Unity is like mid 2000s, right? Like 2005, 2006, and Unreal's what, late 90s?
Yeah. I think Unreal the game came out at like 98 maybe, somewhere around there. And I remember Unity as far back as 2008, so it had to have been around at least a couple years before that. Just we were talking about Fusion Fall last time, and that was the first time I encountered a game made on Unity Engine, was that.
Yeah, and now Unity is, from what I was reading about it, I thought Unreal was a lot more popular than Unity, but it's the opposite. What I was finding was that they were pretty much like 50%, maybe a little bit over 50% of the marketplace is Unity games, and then Unreal is anywhere between like 15 to 30%. and then everything else is either their own engine or some Godot, and there's a couple other ones that are smaller that are free that people use as well.
Well, a large reason of that is Unity's goal and like where they get their market share. It tends to be, since they're a like closed source, they'll sell you the product. It tends to be more based in 2D support, and cross-platform is their functionality. So it makes it pretty easy to pick up for like a casual or indie gamer, especially if you're not trying to do something like very photorealistic intensive. They also are very active in the app space. A lot of people might not think of video games, but like video apps, or apps that have a lot of video elements, gotcha games on phones and stuff. Unity is really big on like the mobile cross-platforming, including like smart TVs.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's where they're probably getting a large portion of that 50% marketplace. Okay, so maybe so that's why I'm like less familiar, and I had that misconception that Unreal was a larger part of the market than Unity, probably because most of the games that I play, because I play mainly FPS and like open world type games, those are probably based more in Unreal than the Unity games are, maybe.
Kind of. You need a lot more experience to effectively use the Unreal Engine. It's not very beginner friendly, especially compared to Unity, as far as like a casual swipe at it. And for that reason, they tend to be really popular, especially in like AAA titles and places that have studios with a lot of developers and a lot of staff and expertise. They're able to really pump what you can get out of Unity or
Because Unity is a little bit easier to use than Unreal.
Correct.
So, question about that: there was something that I encountered, and I don't have a background in coding, so I don't know what the difference between these two languages are, and what exact I was trying to figure out what blueprints were, because there's something in Unreal Engine called blueprints that doesn't require you to know how to code, and Unreal uses
sort of
C++ language, from my understanding, and Unity uses C#. And C# is easier to learn, I guess, is what I think I was starting to understand from what I was reading. And but C++ has though it has like more things that you have to keep track of and like code for, it's more you can tailor it more than C#, and that's the benefit of it.
So it's more of the asset handling. It doesn't it in 3D. It works really well in Unreal because you kind of make all the objects and it can scale relative to the player and the environment, helping it be a lot more custom and personalized experience. But kind of the double-edged sword of that is you have to maintain all of these assets. Unity, and that's one of the big coding differences, is it does garbage collection quite a bit differently, which in computer science, that's like how is it reusing your memory and refreshing it in the game. So it doesn't scale as well because it auto does the memory cleanup for you, which is why it works really good in like side scrollers and 2D, falls off a little bit in 3D because it's like cleaning it up a little too fast for your 3D to really get that high quality rendering. But kind of the other side of that is if you're not as experienced in Unreal, it's really hard to make it good performance because you're going to have a ton of memory leaks.
C++ is pretty low level and very performant, but also somewhat more difficult to use than other languages that might be more tailored to be friendly.
And the blueprint system doesn't exactly sidestep some of the drawbacks, but what it does is it enables a visual type coding. so you can more model the classes with more predefined things and set it up with more of a visual coding style, more of like drag and drop, edit, that sort of thing, instead of just writing the lines of code.
Yeah, it looked like a flowchart.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of having to deal with actual knowing coding syntax, you only need to understand the basic logic of how something works. So I think that the idea is that like a designer or artist could still prototype something that works, or maybe even make the game in that, but it wouldn't be as specialized or probably as efficient as actually coding it yourself in C++ with a experienced coder, but it will let you make something functional without having to be specialized in that in the first place.
It looked like you could set up the things in the game with that flowchart with the blueprints, and then you could click something else that would show you the code that blueprint was doing. So I think like I was wondering if you could just make the whole game in the blueprints, right? And then copy the code and then put it into like Chat GPT and tell Chat GPT to like clean up the code or something or make this more efficient.
Now that's thinking with portals. You probably could, though at that point you could also likely just have asked GPT to code the straight C++ for you. As long as you explained well enough what you were doing.
I think the WYSIWYG kind of blueprint editor would definitely get you a less optimized output, but it would still run. Though ChatGPT might be able to optimize some of the runtime in terms of like efficiency. At the current maturity level of some of those models, it might make it look a lot more efficient, but not actually run also. So there is that trade-off of you kind of lose that expertise of using the system for the blueprint and not having that code expertise. Because if you're taking anything out of ChatGPT, like you're not going to be able to know how to fix it if you don't. So now you go back to needing that code expertise of being able to verify it or fix whatever might have broken if it comes out of ChatGPT in a non-functional way.
Oh man. Okay. So the lazy man's game developing is idea is moot, or it's dead in the water.
I mean, it's probably getting closer to being reasonable, but do you like to fix whatever the connection that the AI probably screws up between it and the rest of the code? You'd probably still need to know enough code to figure out what's going wrong. So like it absolutely could probably speed stuff up, but you're still going to need to know what's going on in the first place to get it to actually run. Because I mean, even with an experienced coder, pretty much nothing runs right on the first try. I feel like, especially if it's something complex, it's not gonna work the first or the 10th or the 29th time or maybe the 200th time.
Oof, that sounds painful. I don't know if I would be suited to learning how to code or not based off of that description of it, because I'm too perfectionist. Like if it didn't work, it would definitely get me tilted a little bit if it didn't fix, like if I couldn't fix it within like the 2 or 3 first times that I messed with it. Oof, the troubleshooting would kill me.
That'll be a special podcast episode. We'll have Slash try to code in VBA live.
Oh God, that'd be a trip.
That's where I determined software engineering isn't for me. Is I spent it's very much an iterative process, and sometimes when you finally get that aha moment, it's really satisfying and rewarding. But other times it's not. Like I spent 2 weeks debugging a code, and there were 2 trailing white spaces, an extra semicolon, and it was causing a compiling error. So like it was a catastrophic failure, and it took 2 weeks of like actively reviewing the code for some damn formatting. I was a little more tilted than overjoyed at that success.
I've definitely had stuff like that. I've had that with Excel. Like you have something that's not running in a script because I forgot to put the the slash on the end of the directory for the file folder or whatever that it's trying to reference, and it's like, the code looks fine, I don't know what the issue is. What do you mean you can't find this directory? Like, this, it should, you're looking for a directory, which means the code's working, so why is it not working?
Oh man.
Yeah, some of those problems can really give your brain some syntax errors.
So, like, Unreal and Unity both also are very generalized game engines. Like, you can use them for a lot of different stuff. If it's making pretty much any kind of video game, you can probably make it in either of those engines. One or the other might be easier to make a certain type of game with, but like, both of them are all around kind of kitchen sink game engines, whereas a lot of in-house engines and things like that are pretty specialized to make one type of game, at least at the start. They might grow into something more later, but they're usually designed to make something specific in mind, and all of the tools are designed around accomplishing that thing. But aside from those two big ones, which do cover a lot of use cases, you do have, especially in the indie space, you got, like we mentioned, Godot, which has been around in a lot of iterations, but has never been super big as a game engine. But the newest version of Godot has started getting hype, and people are expecting it might be like what Blender's turned into for 3D modeling and animation, as far as being open source, but also not just the cheap knockoff, being like actually a very powerful tool. And then you have stuff like Game Maker and RPG Maker and stuff like that. I didn't realize how many games I knew were actually made with Game Maker. I thought it was like 2 or 3. But there's actually a lot of games that I've either played or am playing. I've been playing Fields of Mystria right now. Turns out that's a Game Maker game. The original Spelunky, like pre the ones that's on Steam, there's a freeware Spelunky. That was Game Maker. Hyperlight Drifter, Game Maker. Hotline Miami, also Game Maker. Risk of Rain. Like, these are all big indie games. Like, these are genre-defining indie games that were big for their time. Undertale. People go nuts for Undertale.
The only one of those that you mentioned that I know is Risk of Rain. But you're talking about the first one or the second one? Or both?
The first one. Second one was probably Unity, I'm guessing.
Yeah, the second one was a lot different than the first one. I could see that. I don't even know. So what, Game Maker is another thing that's like Blender, but for video games?
It's a lot more... It tilts more towards being 2D oriented. It's like very editor focused, so you're not going to do as much like low level scripting and stuff. You can code, you're still coding in it, but like, it's not as like widespread and powerful as something like Unreal. It's
more adjacent to the blueprint type features. It's got more like visual aspects to the logic flows.
But it's made for 2D games only.
I think it does have some 3D capabilities, at least depending on which iteration of Game Maker, because there's a lot of Game Makers, but it tends to get used specifically for 2D, especially like indie pixel art kind of games.
Yeah, it's like the free open source or low budget engines are mostly used to make those little cheapy $5, $10 indie game 2D games that are on Steam. But if you want to make something Godot that looks nice,
is mixing.
What's that?
That's where Godot is starting to mix up the market a little bit on that end, because they, unlike the Unity and Unreal and those like very general systems that are kind of all inclusive, and really most other systems are kind of all inclusive, Godot is more of a framework. It is more of a lightweight, it's more modular. So instead of natively being specialized towards a certain thing, a certain platform, it's a lot easier to modify it to what you need. and to also only bring in the parts that you need. Because if you're using Unity, for example, and you're only developing a game for Windows, you probably still have the Mac libraries, the Linux libraries, the mobile libraries, the PS4 libraries that are all just in and just making your install bigger and not being used by your game at all. Where you can really just add in the parts that you're using and help it be more efficient. It's really started to take off, especially in VR, for that reason, because VR systems right now are a little more on the resource limited side and not as much cross-platform, though Godot can do cross-platform pretty well. Since it is open source, there are absolutely no fees for it, even if you monetize your product. And the biggest thing is it's just newer, so the support is still varying and mixed expertise with it. But definitely gaining more traction.
Especially after the Unity pricing thing, Godot picked up a lot of steam from that because people were immediately looking for alternatives that weren't Unreal.
What happened with that? What are you talking about? What Unity fiasco?
So Unity, I think it was towards the end of 2023, was going to introduce a runtime fee, which was going to be basically over a certain threshold, developers were going to get charged for every time a game was installed, instead of, like game engines, usually it's either like a percent royalty on profits or you're paying per seats or whatever. It was going to be each time the game got installed, which means how much you were paying to Unity was also going to fluctuate depending on how much your game was getting downloaded. And people did not take it well. The reaction was very poor.
They didn't remove paying for seats. You were paying for that, and you were still paying for seats.
Sheesh. So when you said runtime, I thought you were going to say like every time that the game dev opened Unity to mess with the game or something like that. But it was every time the game was installed on a customer that bought the games.
Both, actually.
Jesus Christ.
No, they were going to have also every time it was ran. That's brutal.
Every time the game was installed after a game hits 200,000 installs and 200,000 in revenue, not profit, revenue. So that's 20 cents per charge for every time the developer is rebuilding the code, every time Slash installs the game, they're getting charged a fee by the developer. So like, think if they're middlemaning in Steam, sure, maybe if you buy that game in Steam, Steam is getting a cut. So Steam is still getting that cut, and Unity was trying to get a cut of that as well.
That was probably going to wreak havoc on everybody's margin.
Yep, that's why everybody lost their marbles. They lost their Jenna marbles.
Yeah, so they had to step back from that plan of action like pretty quick because everyone started throwing a hissy fit about it.
It looked like they actually took exactly a year to fully cancel it. I think it was like, as I was reading their blog post on their site, it was like September 2024 that they decided, okay, effective immediately, we're not doing that. After it exploded on impact.
Did they implement it though, or was it pre-implementation? Like they were planning on doing it, or were they already charging people the runtime fee?
I think it was planned. I don't know if it actually went out, but I think it was like advance notice that, hey, we're gonna do this year, and then people lost their mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure it ever went live. They lost an incredible amount. Because they're publicly traded, right? They lost an incredible amount of stock value. They lost a lot of their employees as well, because just from a money grab point of view, a lot of the core developers of the engine actually left the company as well. They were actually kind of at a point before they decided to backtrack it where like the company might have not actually had a future because of they were just losing the expertise and essentially industry boycott against their software.
They went through a few rounds of layoffs too. Like one of the rounds was 25% of all of their staff.
Whoa.
And that wasn't even the only time that they got rid of a lot of people. They were having like a very rough year, 2 year period there.
Yeah, so they had a quite a bit of a shakeup last year. They were not doing too hot.
Kind of like the gambling episode. It was like when you corpo just a bit too hard and everything lights on fire immediately. When that magnesium dust just you just corpo just a little bit too far. You found the line.
So what now? So that's why their pay structure is so convoluted now, because they have like, when I was looking it up, they had like a bunch of tiers. But one of them was interesting because one of them they give to students that are in college. If you're like at an accredited institution, you can get it for free. Like you get the pro version of what like a game developer would be paying like $200 for per seat, or no, is it 200? No. They're
it's 200 per month.
Yeah, it's 200 per month per seat. Or like 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 per year. But they'll give you all of that to a student that's studying to become like a software developer for free for the duration of their however long they're in college or whatever for it. And until you start making money, you don't have to pay them anything. So you can kind of the bar to entry is easier if you're a student to learn their game engine. And I don't think they were offering that before. That's something new.
I see you making background noise that I'm gonna have to edit out, you asshole.
Me?
Yeah, you whatever your little spinner thing is.
You know what this is? This is a GPU stilt.
Okay.
I'll stop playing with it now.
I ruined Slash's one happy moment in his life. But yeah, for Unity, the education thing makes sense because it means more people will be launching into the workforce that are knowledgeable with Unity, which helps them have more market share in that space against Unreal if there's more devs that prefer using Unity. And there's a lot of student projects that have been important in the industry too. Like Unreal and Unity both have had cool games that were made that were student projects, or even other like Portal was originally a student project. It was a different game. Then Valve hired the people that made that, and then they made Portal, but that was just like a student thing they were making. It was a game where you could actually fire the portals through other portals. It was called, I don't know, it was like Doors or something like that. It was called something simple, but it was like fantasy based, and you could fire the gateways through the other gateways, which you can't do in actual Portal. But yeah, they hired them, and that student team got to make Portal, which, like, talk about getting into the industry. You're in school, and you make this school project or student project, and then you get hired by Valve and make, two of the most renowned games of all time. Like, whoop, it's all downhill from here. Like, we've made it. We made it out of the gate.
Yeah.
That's another good one to bring up is Source Engine. I wasn't even thinking about that when I was, researching your notes, but like Source has been a big deal too. You don't have as many games that are made on it, but the games that are made on it tend to be pretty important. Mm-hmm. And you have a big modding scene with them. And Gary's mod exists.
But like mod.
Half-Life, Portal, Team Fortress 2, Counter-Strike, that's all Source Engine. And those are all very important games for the game industry. And even there's ones by other companies like Titanfall. Both of the Titanfall games, I believe, were on Source Engine. Probably very modified Source Engine, but those were on Source Engine nonetheless.
Source Engine is it's not a super specialized one as well. Is one of the earlier attempts of more modular type, similar to Godot in terms of modularity. It's not as modular, but One of the big intents of modularity for Source was backwards compatibility, especially as a lot of apps started to go away from 32 towards 64-bit, and between like DX9, DX11, Source was really good at bridging that compatibility gap.
Flash, how do you say Godot?
I think the T is silent. I say Godot.
I say Godot too. I wanted to check that.
It's okay. The audience can roast whichever one of us is wrong. They can roast us in the comments.
The wiki says it's Godot. Godot.
Yeah, because Godot is what you're gonna say when your game doesn't run. When you messed up the code, you're gonna say Godot. You're gonna be like, I only learned all of my coding from Lua scripting in Roblox. I don't know what's going on. How do I fix this?
Godot is completely free, right? Like unlike
it's open
Unreal
source and free.
No matter what, even if you start making a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, there's no thresholds, no seat fees, no install fees. Completely free in every part of its license.
Are there
But it's relatively newer.
What's a notable game that I might know that's coded in that? Like, are there any like crazy ones that like popped off?
There's a Sonic game. Sonic Colors Ultimate was in Godot, apparently. Or Sonic Colors, both of the Sonic Colors.
Ooh, there's a Sonic? Okay. I used to really like Sonic when I was young on the Genesis.
And Brotato. I think it's just new enough that there's not that much yet. Like, I mean, there have been Godot ones for a while, but Godot 4, I think, is the current Godot, is like the hype one. And this is where that engine's tech is catching up. It's not just, you know, a fun little side engine for script kiddies. Now it's like an actual contender this time.
Maybe one of the bigger ones, Slay the Spire 2.
Oh, Slay the Spire.
That one's used that.
I think that's come up on my Steam before. That one and Brotato are definitely ones that I've seen pop up. I've never played either one of them, but because that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like, these are kind of on the cheaper side of games, and I'm usually in that AAA space.
Yeah. You don't play as many indie games. There's well, apparently Unrailed is made in Godot.
Getting Over It?
The
one where you're like, the guy, you're stuck in the cauldron and you're using the hammer to like climb the crazy cliff.
Very big streamer game.
Yeah, that's mostly what I know it from. It was quite popular in streamer games.
What was it called?
Getting Over It.
Getting Over It.
The other thing about Godot is it has both 2D and 3D tools. Like, Unity does have some 2D stuff, and again, you see a lot of mobile stuff. Unreal Engine seems to pretty much trend towards, like, you're going to try and make pretty much the most cutting-edge game you possibly can. Like, I don't think you're going to see a lot of pixel art games made in Unreal Engine. It's possible, but people are probably going to pick a different tool set to do that. Unity has a fair amount of 2D stuff, but Godot was, I think a lot of its history was 2D, and now it's doing both 3D and 2D. And you can use C++ and C# in it, and they have their own Godot script. They have GD script.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's pretty flexible on how you can use it. And it's got stuff for HTML5 and Android and stuff, so you can do mobile deployment and all of that with it. And Linux.
Yeah, and it being a free open source thing, rather than you having to pay the company royalties after a certain amount of revenue, and even for an initial seat, like upfront cost for that is basically none. So
yeah,
I would imagine that that's an attractive thing to a like single man team or even a small indie dev team.
So
that's just trying to
adjacent
start off.
to the game engines, like you were mentioning, that Unity had some really good discounts for students. VMware recently in tech sector, they recently got acquired, and they've been like the name for like hardware virtualization for a long time. And after their recent acquisition, they've been jacking up the prices and stuff. And one of their core things that made VMware the number one name was they were free to use for students, and they've removed that. And that was kind of mid 2024, and that really kind of was a bit of an eye opener for how overnight they went from like the name to, well, that looks like we're moving on to something else. That really started just in the tech industry, including game engines. That made the Unity execs say, hey, we want to make this more available, not less available, because that's a bit of popularity. Because if you got folks over there using Godot for free, we want them to use our tool, not that one.
Actually, back to Unity of just how many games are made with that, and I know Slash has played some of these. Rust, that's Unity. Tarkov, also Unity. City Skylines, Unity. Hearthstone, Amogus is Unity. Let's see. Subnautica, I knew that. I knew Subnautica was Unity. I didn't know Cuphead and City Skylines were Unity, though. Hollow Knight, also Unity. I'm pretty sure Arknights is Unity as well, which for mobile, and in Genshin is, I think, very heavily modified Unity.
Notably, Hello Kitty Island Adventure is also in Unity.
That's true, that's Unity. The Forest, also Unity. Fall Guys. I feel like Fall Guys would definitely make Slash rage. Have you played Fall Guys?
I have, and that game has made me fucking rage. It's made me lose my fucking mind.
Rimworld and Ori and the Blind Forest, also Unity.
Yeah.
Beat Saber, the best cardio.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know why I'm surprised by that. I just am.
Godot could be, especially with that, how big of a jump 4 seems to be from 3 for Godot. It seems like that could be a pretty big deal. It could be a big engine for upcoming game development, especially after you've had blunders like the Unity thing like that. Like, any mistakes any of the big ones make are just going to help Godot out, because like that's the next most popular thing.
They're definitely gaining traction in the VR space, because Unreal is all about that photorealism, making it look super pretty. But that's generally comes with, like, you need the beef to back it up and run it. And that's where Unity really steals the cake in the VR scape for like the less photorealistic games like Beat Saber. I mean, it does what it does, but like it's not photorealistic quality. It doesn't need to be either. But that's the kind of thing that really are the strengths in the Unity platform. Godot is looking more for trying to bridge that gap that Unreal doesn't really have today, and that's where I think a lot of their opportunity is in the VR space, is making steps towards more photorealism in the VR, but also having it function.
So how about we'll transition into some more like in-house and specialized engine stuff. Actually, before we do that, there's one other engine that's fairly important that we haven't touched on yet, which is CryEngine, which is also Lumberyard is kind of CryEngine. But, I mean, that's isn't it? It's based off of CryEngine, isn't it?
They're completely different.
Russ is
scoffing. Are you kidding? Lumberyard is an Amazon product. That's an AWS software as a service. It's like cloud first native. If you're making like cloud hosted, like you don't have your own data center and you want to make like a distributed compute game for it's becoming more popular in like sharded multiplayer, where it's like pseudo open world but you can't see that many people at a time. Lumberyard is really growing more in that space, and it's more pay as you go. Whereas CryEngine is, again, the other end of that. It's the photorealism. It's really heavily around open world, more single player type games, probably The Hunter, or games like The Hunter. It's really rich nature visuals. It's got really high texture quality and details. It has a lot of VR support as well. It's mostly not in like single player games yet in VR. It's more for like simulation type things.
Mm-hmm. That was a game that was melting GPUs before, right?
Yay. Yeah, Ross got aggroed. We were on like camera with each other. Ross like immediately scoffed. He was like, "Whoa, what'd you say?" But the short answer, yes, Lumberyard is based off of a CryEngine foundation, and then it gets even more convoluted because Star Citizen's engine is then based off of Lumberyard, so it's like 3 game engines deep by this point. Star Citizen has made their own engine called Star Engine. What a creative name. Thank you, marketing. And then that's based off of Lumberyard. Lumberyard, notably, you've had stuff like New World, which, I mean, semi-recent for MMOs. And in Star Citizen, everybody knows what that is and doesn't know when it's going to release. And in CryEngine goes all the way back to, like, Crysis games.
I wonder if that's why they have such bad problems with optimization.
Probably. Crytek and, you know, like... Crysis, the Crysis games were always like the tests for your GPU. It's like, oh, you can run Crysis 3, holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we don't have games like that anymore where it's you have a single game that is the flagship test for your GPU. But the Crytek games were definitely that.
Oh yeah, that was all over all the benchmarks of the mid 2000s. Because
the benchmarks nowadays, sell your uncomplete game, and your benchmark for your CPU is, can you run it with all my memory leaks?
All right, so then in-house engines, there's a fair amount of them that are still prevalent, even with how much is made on either Unity or Unreal. You still have EA in it to win it with Frostbite Engine and all of the poor people who have to use that. But it is a powerful engine for like the lighting and destruction tech and some of the stuff in there. It most of the time runs pretty good, but that's one that was, again, like a super specialized engine. It was designed to make Battlefield games. Now they use it for everything from, you know, FIFA to they made Dragon Age with it, and like Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda, and, you know, all the ones that people didn't like as much. Those were Frostbite Engine. But like, it is, for what it was originally designed for, which is Battlefield, it's very good at that. It's very good at the FPS part. But they've also used it for a lot of other things, and it's sprawled into a general use case engine, but for just EA Studios.
Yeah, but you know, that I think that type of in-house thing, and in their case, I think it did cause a few problems, right? Because when you come into that company, you probably haven't ever really developed on Frostbite. So that's an issue. You have to get onboarded. So it costs money to do that. And then if you lose people, that can cause delays, which it did, because they had to redesign, because like you were saying, that engine was made for Battlefield and then adapted for other genres. And I know for a fact that it caused a lot of delays when they were developing Dragon Age Inquisition. And what was the other one? Mass Effect Andromeda is also on that engine. That also had to be pushed back. The release date was supposed to be like a year ahead of where it got released, and it was due to problems that were pertaining to the engine and development with that engine. And then there was the whole thing with Anthem. Anthem got pushed back a lot. I don't remember how much, but I remember when I first saw the preview for that game, I was so pumped to play it, and then it was just problem after problem and delay after delay. And I was just like, all right, this is, and it turned into like a whole shit show. And that game kind of collapsed, right? On release.
From outside in,
like, ooh, Firefall.
It looks like it's just C++, C#, but in terms of coding. So like, what do you have experience in that could carry over from like coming into a company using Frostbite, right? But yeah, the nuances, the finer points of it, sure, they got the gist of it, but it's not going to be as polished when it's not as widely available for developers to play and familiarize with themselves that might not work for the company.
Mm-hmm. And it got to the point where EA was pretty much using that for all their games, right? For what, like a decade or close to it, maybe a little bit over. I don't remember when they first adopted that, but I remember that there was like a huge push from inside the company, like, hey, this is the engine we're using for every game that we put out. And I think they stepped back from it a little bit a couple years ago, right? In 2023, they made that announcement where they're like, okay, any company that wants to develop games under our umbrella, yeah, you're free to use the Frostbite engine, but you can also start using other things. So it's almost like they're shifting a little bit away from that proprietary engine requirement for some of their games. So we should start seeing other games come out from from EA that aren't using the Frostbite engine. So
the industry starting to learn you have to share your software for people to know how to use your software.
Mm-hmm. I heard, I don't know if this is how accurate this was, because this was just from something that I got off of Reddit, but somebody was discussing that the new Battlefield might end up not being on Frostbite, and they might use like a CryEngine for it because it has all of the things required for an FPS game. I was like, oh, that could be cool, but
Imagine if they ended up using Star Engine. That would be a crazy full circle loop. Because I mean, Star Citizen does have like tanks and a lot of FPS components and all kinds of stuff. It's got a lot of vehicular gameplay and large land spaces. So that would be pretty weird.
it would be funny for them to move away from the engine that was developed for that series, but I don't know how likely that would be. I still feel like, if anything, that Battlefield series should probably just continue using the Frostbite.
Yeah, as long as they're updating it, which they've kept updating Frostbite Engine for a long time with each Battlefield release. Each Battlefield release has been on a different version of Frostbite.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing with that is EA is really known for their DRM. Frostbite works really well with the DRM that they like to push. And not just in Battlefield, other notable ones maybe for Frostbite or the Dragon Age series, FIFA games, Madden NFL. Those are all, also Plants vs. Zombies, actually.
And what is the DRM? That's the anti-cheat, or what they use for anti-cheat?
Yeah, that's what they do to like lock down the code when you grow their game. Anti-piracy, you can't, it makes it harder to mod. You can't, they're not open with the game's code.
Oh wait, so wait, games that allow mods like Baldur's Gate and like the Elder Scrolls games that have a big modding communities, do those have DRMs in them or no?
Elder Scrolls is a great example. Elder Scrolls uses two engines, actually. The primary game that the engine behind Elder Scrolls is Gamebryo, and that one is closed source. It's not open source, but it's kind of modular, and they have a lot of integrations with Creation Kit. Creation Kit engine is open source, and that is what they make available for their modding. So they won't let you get like the core nitty gritty of their game from like the closed source POV, but they do make their code openly integrate with the Creation engine. So that way the modding community can explore and modify most of the assets, but maybe not take them and sell them as their own.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that makes sense how they're putting the mods with one engine and applying it to the native or the base game engine or however you would refer to it. I didn't know that the games did that. That makes sense though. So that's why most games are not mod based games, because they don't want to release that original code to the community.
Well, there's a whole list of risks associated with that, especially if it's a multiplayer game that you're trying to have modding in. Mm-hmm. World of Warcraft was an early example because they made their game very accessible in terms of modding. even though it's an MMO. And that led to a lot of security issues and like server side breaches and in-game hacking, that sort of stuff, that if they wouldn't have opened it up for the modding, they just wouldn't have had to deal with a lot of those challenges.
Okay, so then that's probably why Guild Wars doesn't let too many mods. Like it basically only lets you use Arc DPS and overlays aren't really mods, but the Arc
it's not
DPS is
touching code.
reading some of the code that's being sent back and forth between the game client and their servers, and you can potentially make a change to the data that's being sent to their server, and in that case that's what they closely monitor, and if they think you're doing that, then they flag your account.
There's not a lot of MMOs that allow modding at all. The only time I can really think about modding as in like getting something to be a different asset or code in game would be Final Fantasy 14. I'm sorry, Yoshi P. But there are things that change models and stuff in the game for that. And then entirely for innocent reasons. and actually the Elder Scrolls Online does have official like add-on API for the interface. The interface is very customizable in ESO. Obviously not the actual game assets and code and stuff like that, but the UI you can really change a lot in ESO. But yeah, Ross basically brought us right into Gamebryo and /CryEngine, which are basically the same engine, again, like a foundation engine, one engine being built off another. And Bethesda's just been using Gamebryo for like ever, since at least Oblivion. And then all the way to Starfield, still Creation Engine, still basically Gamebryo. You've got a really long time with that game engine. Like how we make fun of Guild Wars 2 being on the Guild Wars 1 engine. It's kind of like that. Like that studio likes using that one engine, and they're going to try and get as much mileage out of that thing as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the way their licensing model works, that sort of makes sense. Theirs is $50,000 for a license, but there's no monthly fee, there's no royalties, but $50,000 a seat's not something to scoff at.
Yeah, that's a lot up front. So, but it's permanent. Once you pay that $50K, that's it.
Yep, one-time purchase.
There's a weird one I just thought about for game engines. Helldivers 2 was made on a deprecated game engine that was discontinued in 2018. It was a Autodesk engine. Autodesk Stingray, formerly known as BitSquid,
That's
by
cursed.
Autodesk, who makes Maya. They had a game engine, and for whatever reason, Helldivers 2 devs took that engine and continued to develop it and made Helldivers 2 on it. Also,
you're talking about that company that made AutoCAD?
Yep. Or yeah, Autodesk and all that, Maya, so on.
Yeah, that's cursed for a game engine.
Vermintide 2 are both on that engine as well, apparently. I thought those were Unreal Engine the whole time, but nope, they're apparently Stingray.
They spent too long asking if they could and not long enough asking if they should.
And like Helldivers 2, I feel like is a reasonably graphically impressive game. Like it's a good looking game. You wouldn't think it's made on like pre-Revolutionary War tech from Autodesk, but
yeah, no, that I would never have guessed that that's what that engine was. I thought it was for sure Unreal.
That one was super weird for me.
What other little indie dev engines are there? Well, not indie dev, I guess, but
I can think of a very specified indie dev one, which is the one Braid and the buy to play Spelunkies are made off of. I think the Spelunky dev was friends with the Braid developer, and that's why they kind of have a similar art style going on, because he let him use his game engine that he had made, and so Spelunky was made off of Braid's tech, I believe it was, whereas the original, the freeware Spelunky, was Game Maker, but he remade Spelunky, and then there's Spelunky 2, and that's off of an engine that a single dude made for his solo dev game. Both of those games, I think, are. I mean, Spelunky 2 might have more devs, but I thought Spelunky 1 was pretty much a mainly one dude. And then you have like No Man's Sky's engine. They made their own engine for that in their new game Light No Fire, which is very procedural focused, but they've expanded that a lot over time. Like it's gotten a lot of big graphics updates and VR and the NVIDIA tech and all kinds of stuff. They've reworked cloud and water tech a lot.
That game has come a long way. I wonder if when it flopped at first, when it released, that was because of their game engine, right? And then you're saying is they updated their engine and they fixed it.
I mean, there's a No Man's Sky could be an episode all by itself, and there's like many 3-hour documentaries on YouTube about No Man's Sky. But developing a game engine alongside of making a game with a small team is difficult because you're not just making the game with predefined tools, you're also making the tools to make the game while you're making the game, which is like doing one of those is hard. So doing both of them at the same time does let you do specialist things, and I'm sure that's why they were able to update the game crazy fast after launch, is because they know the tools very well and design the tools to be able to do that. Same with Warframe. Warframe came out as a pretty simple game, and they've turned it into a game that's like 13 different genres and 29 games stacked on top of itself practically. Like Warframe's tech has also come a long way. And that's the kind of crackhead shit you can do when you have your own super specialized game engine where your team knows how to do it and what it's used for. Yeah, there's a lot of, and especially space games. Space games tend to have their own game engines, actually, thinking about it now. Elite Dangerous, its own engine. The original Elite pioneered some of the very first 3D vector graphics. You have like the X franchise, all of those are on their own engine.
Space Engineers, V-Rage 2. V-Rage 2.0 is not used for very much, but it's got incredible realism in the physics. Just usually in the space games, it's just so physics intensive. There's not a lot of need for it to that level of physics control.
Yeah, and that type of engine is probably not used for many other games, right?
Ooh, how about Eve, too? Eve's got its own engine. That's their own tech, too. And that's come a long ways. Modern Eve does look like a modern game, but that game is old as shit. It's from, what, 2003?
Yeah, that's an oldie.
Yep, 2003, May 6th. And then another big heavy hitter that doesn't have that many entries, but is fairly technologically impressive would be Snowdrop Engine, which is what Massive Entertainment uses. That's for like the Division games. And like that's pretty good tech. I feel like both Division games looked pretty good visually, especially like the volumetric stuff. I feel like it fit snowy New York better. Like in the first one, Division 2 does look really good. But like all of the snow effects and all of that kind of stuff that they hit in the first game, how it was like atmospherically designed, that art style and all that really fit their tech very well for that game engine.
The Snowdrop is a really good example of an engine that was designed for the tech. It is technically cross-platform, but Snowdrop is primarily like Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and a little bit of Windows in there. It was very much intended for that like always online gameplay you're connected in. And it had a lot of different optimizations for streaming features as well. It was one of the few engines that had good support on Stadia for the brief period of time, if anyone had a Google Stadia.
How about that a South Park game was made on Snowdrop Engine? Fractured But Whole was made on Snowdrop Engine.
That's weird.
Now that's pretty cracked. Who did make that? Actually, it's a good question. Who made that? Oh, it was Ubisoft.
Okay, that makes sense. There you go.
It wasn't massive, but I mean, same publisher. And in like Avatar, the game was pretty graphically impressive, and for the open world, like whatever to say about the gameplay, the actual how it looked pretty close to the movies. I have a crackhead one for you. Lost Ark, which is really not a very old game, was made on Unreal Engine 3.
Why 3?
I have no idea, but they did. It's probably very modified 3, but it is Unreal Engine 3, and I mean, it looks and runs pretty good, but like, I mean, that's a what, like a 2023 game at this point? It's only a couple years old.
Not that old, yeah. It should have definitely been on at least 4. 4 was definitely out at that time, maybe even 5. I don't know when 5 came out. It was recently, though.
Okay, so Lost Ark was probably released in least in the East at in 2018. We just probably didn't get it till
it didn't get NA
now.
Okay,
but,
I see.
I mean, still 2014.
2014, its first release in South Korea.
What?
Revealed,
damn, that's
right?
an old game. Oh yeah, Smilegate. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so it was revealed in 2014, but released in 2019. Still, that's like almost a decade of Unreal Engine 4 being out at that point.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that game honestly looks pretty nice for what it is. I mean, the top-down MMO vibe.
That's a good looking
Yeah,
game.
that's weird because it from what I'm finding, it is Unreal 3, but Unreal 3, like the thing that why would I use Unreal 4? Because DirectX 11 exists. They crammed DirectX 11 into the Unreal 3. It's kind of wild.
That's a crackhead move. That's like the Helldivers 2 thing. Like, who made that decision?
Yeah.
Yeah, and why? Why would you? I guess they were.
That
probably
took a lot
well.
of bourbon to get to that kind of decision.
Yep.
I wonder when the big game developers decide, like, when they're gonna make a new game, what makes them want to develop their own engine? Because to me, it seems like it would be a lot more money, a lot more time to develop their own engine. Like, is it really because of the royalty and the fee structure of like the bigger game engines like Unreal and Unity that turn them off to wanting to use those engines rather and develop their own? Because like the Division, a lot of people played it, right? But I do remember there was a time when it came out and there was some issues with the way that the game played, and I'm guessing that had to do with their engine because the kinks weren't worked out, and then after a few months or a year, the game got to a point where they had fixed almost all the bugs and everything was running right. But by then, everyone had kind of come, experienced the game, and moved on. And when that happens to a game, it's really, really hard for the game to recover. Like, No Man's Sky is a success story for that. And I think the Division also went through something like that, but I don't think that they quite recovered in the same way that No Man's Sky did. So, and the changes weren't as drastic as what No Man's Sky accomplished. But then they tried to re-release, and they did Division 2, and that's on the same game engine as the first one, right?
Yep.
And I mean, it released. It's good, but it's basically just the first game perfected. You know what I mean? It's not. They're not doing anything crazy that they weren't doing before. And so, like,
from a player point of view, right? And that's where maybe from a player, it makes less sense why you would use one engine over the other for the most part. But it's really, what are you designing it for? If you're designing it for, and what do you need? Like, are you trying to get audio? Are you trying to get that photorealism? Are you trying to make sure that DRM works great? Some DRM games are kind of CPU intensive and might not be very good on a mobile or something like a TV that would have very little of that CPU resource to do. So if you have maybe your own in-house DRM that you don't want to make public, in some cases, heavily modifying an existing engine could make more sense.
Oh, okay. All right. So then that's what goes into decision making when it's okay. I hadn't even really thought about the different platforms and how that would affect the game running properly with the hardware it's running on.
Unreal 3 was really big on like GameCube and Wii, some of the like that genre, but you get to more Unreal 4 when you're looking at like PlayStation 4, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So some of it's the time of the tech, right?
Okay, yeah.
You're talking about the Division recovery, but there's also another engine and another game that's Ubisoft related that made me think of is Rainbow Six Siege. That really wasn't a hit at launch and became big later. It became really big later, but at launch, it was not super well received.
Why was it a buggy mess?
I think it was, I mean, there was that too. I think it was probably a mix of the actual game design and being buggy and corpo stuff, but they kept updating the crap out of it, and then it just picked up momentum.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, at least for a while, is a staple of the FPS genre, but on at least its first year after launch, it was not that. And that's on their Anvil engine, Ubisoft's Anvil engine, which is what powers all the Assassin's Creed games too, and For Honor, and back all the way back to the 2008 Prince of Persia, and most notably the world's first quadruple A title, Skull and Bones.
Yeah, quadrupled. I love that.
Ross, do you have any parting wisdom for us?
Yes, a lot of people cry when they cut onions, but the trick is not to form an emotional bond first.
Gosh damn it.
I'm trying to process that, and my brain is getting a syntax error.
Slash has never had emotions before, so that part didn't register for him.
I don't know what those are.
Never cut an onion before.
I'll cut a man, but I've never cut an onion. Well, thank you for joining us again as we pretend to know what we're talking about with game dev. Upcoming, we're going to have our gaming community, the Eternal Senate, voting on more topics, and we're also going to be doing our first guest special, first guest episode that's going to be about introductory anime. Thank you for listening once again, and we'll see you back next week for more Unhinged and Unranked.